Congressman, I want to ask you about something we've been talking about for 2 hours. Do you have any information on why the Capitol Police haven't briefed the public about the events of last Wednesday?
Well, part of the problem, Nicole, is, of course, the chief of police and both sergeants at arms, who are the people who are charged with our security, all three of them have resigned. Appropriately so, I'm afraid, because it was just such a massive security failure. But yeah, you would have thought in normal times, of course, somebody, the Secret Service, the FBI, somebody, the Department of Homeland Security would have been in front of the Congress and saying, look, we have an investigation yet to do, but we understand that many of you are glad to be alive today, so we want to share with you everything that we know. Instead, we're reading about interviews that the recently resigned chief of police of the Capitol Police Force is giving to the press. And you ask a really good question. It is yet another indication of how dysfunctional the executive branch is in this moment, which is terrifying when you think about the fact that we're all going back to Washington this week, and we will all be back for the inauguration on the 20th. You'd like to have better faith than we do right now.
And I guess I asked that question with the same theory here, that there's so much on the line in the next 10 days in terms of how we're seen all around the world. And if the public hasn't heard from the police force that are supposed to protect you, if no one knows clearly who's functioning right now at 5:25 p.m. on Monday as America's commander-in-chief, there's reporting that it was Vice President Pence who activated the National Guard. There's reporting in multiple news outlets that White House aides do not plan to carry out any of Donald Trump's orders if they don't want to or don't think they're sound. I mean, do you have any clarity of, one, who's in charge of your safety and protection at the Capitol, and two, who's in charge of the country's safety as our commander-in-chief?
I heard you say this is a conversation you never anticipated having. I'm having that same sensation right now. Look, the prospect you raise is a horrifying prospect, right? The only thing more horrifying than the notion that Donald Trump remains in charge of the nuclear codes, that Donald Trump could order a military attack, that Donald Trump could tomorrow morning pardon all of the, what's the number now, 100 or so people that have been arrested for trying to kill members of Congress. The only thing scarier than that is the notion that maybe somebody else, other than the president of the United States, decides that they're going to take on presidential powers. I mean, this is a really ugly moment, which of course is why, though it is not likely to happen, this is why the president should not be president. I'm thinking back on Susan Collins, who after the first impeachment said, well, I think this president has learned his lesson. And what we know is that whatever it is that you imagine that he might do, he will find ways to shock you by doing even crazier things. And again, this is a man with his finger on the nuclear trigger. And that's why our hope right now is that Michael Pence, whose life was put in grave danger, who was asked to break the law, might just say, hey, I'm not comfortable with 9 days of the kind of leadership gap, the kind of vacuum that you're talking about.
I want to ask you about impeachment. Why do you think Republicans who think of themselves as caring about the country's national security, some even have the audacity to think they do that better than Democrats, and I'm not sure how any of them would make that case ever again after Wednesday, why wouldn't they be for impeachment too?
Well, there's an answer to that question, but let's also be clear here. There were some Republicans who really stood up. Not many, but not all of them participated. I mean, think of this, Nicole. After we've almost all, been killed by a mob, we went back in session, and I got to listen to Mo Brooks of Alabama spew 5 minutes of utter conspiracy nonsense about undocumented aliens voting in this election. So it is important to remember that it is a subset of these guys who are true believer, hardcore cult-like figures. But to answer your question, if you want to know what they're afraid of, look at what happened to Lindsey Graham when Lindsey Graham tried to walk through Reagan National Airport, and he was beset by a mob. I mean, there's no other word for it, by a brutal, disgusting, obscene mob. And here's Lindsey Graham, who traded his soul to Donald Trump 4 years ago, and none of that mattered, because when he found the tiniest dust spectacle of decency, that was enough to turn the mob on him. And that is what my Republican colleagues are terrified of.
Cori Bush has a plan to get rid of the members who violated their oath of office. And on the merits, she's absolutely right. It is not even clear what their defense would be. Do you think that will gain momentum?
Well, what I fear here, Nicole, I do believe that while it won't necessarily be this week, that Donald Trump will come face to face with accountability. I do think he's likely to get impeached for the second time. He will carry that around for the rest of his life. Wherever he goes from here on in, there will be a small number of MAGA holdouts that might welcome. But otherwise, that plus the the charges he's likely to face in New York, maybe in Georgia, I do believe that ultimately accountability gets visited on Donald Trump. And we're seeing accountability get visited on the hundreds of people who broke into the Capitol, which is appropriate and right. And those folks should all go to jail. What concerns me, Nicole, is that the Mo Brooks of the world, the people who should have known better, the Josh Hawleys, the Ted Cruz, the people who knew that they were lying, who knew that when they told their followers that democracy had been stolen from them in the form of a fraudulent election, they knew that wasn't true. Look, these guys are smart enough to know that when 60 courts, including lots of Obama judges, laugh you out of court, but they said, you know what? I want that fuel. I want that fuel in my political engine. My fear is, Nicole, that they will escape accountability because they've been put in positions of both political power and they're insulated. They'll say, well, you can't attack me for what I said. I've got the speech and debate clause, or I've got my First Amendment rights. So those guys who are, in my opinion, culpable only second to Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, any number of people in the House, I fear that they're going to escape accountability.
Well, they better not. And I think the politics of this are a moving target. And shame on anyone who thinks that they're going to be a winner next time voters go to the polls. My last question for you is about your staff. I was in the White House on 9/11, and as a staffer, I was terrified for many months afterward. I wonder how your staff is doing.
Well, fortunately, we took the decision to keep them out of the Capitol that day. And so thank God, in the midst of worrying about so many things, I wasn't worried about, my poor staff, as so many were, hiding under desks or in closets as the mob broke down doors. But nonetheless, I mean, they went through hell. I was just on a caucus call with fellow members, and as time goes by, they're getting more and more angry as we learn that there were people who were armed, as we learned what was involved here. So we're going to have, look, Nicole, you know these people. These are young people who could be making so much more money than they make in the Capitol, and they do it because they love our government. They feel reverence, and they sense the sacred quality of the Capitol. And so this has been a huge emotional dagger to their hearts, and it's going to take them a while to recover.